Hi everyone, trust you all are doing well, and welcome back to another lesson in Eloquent relationships. Now, in this lesson, we're going to be discussing a little bit more advanced relationship in Laravel, but quite useful as well as the many-to relationship. But this one is kind of very unique. Now, we got the polymorphic relationship, and this time we're going to discuss a one-to-one relationship. Now, the word polymorphic, it comes from it's basically got its roots in a Greek word. Now, poly means many. Right, so poly means many, and morph means form like this. Now, basically what we can, if we read it in a sense, we can actually read it as many forms. So polymorph, many forms. All right. Now, the reason for that is basically in this instance, you basically got one model that you can take on many different forms. Now, in our case, we got a Joe's car rental example. Now, an employee can rent a car and a customer can rent a car. So basically, the car is basically the child of the parents of employee and customer. This is pure hypothetical. You can obviously structure this database however you want, but in this case, I'm doing it in the sense of polymorphic relationship. All right. Now, in this case, the car can take the morph means in the form of the employee, or the car can basically take a morph in terms of a customer. All right. So it can be either employee's car or it can be a customer car. So that's why it can morph into many different means. Basically the form, so many forms. All right. So how do we set up a relationship like that? So we will have three models. We got an employee model, we got a customer model, and we obviously have a car model. Now, the reason for polymorphic, let's say later on, you want to, let's say, add another column. Instead of employee and customer, you maybe want to add like an owner can rent the car as well. All right. So basically now what you'll have to do is you need to create another field in your car where it's actually going to be owner ID. If you guys remember the one-to-one relationship that we had in the first episode. Now, and let's say another instance come in again, and then you need to add another column. As you can see, polymorphic, you don't have to keep on adding columns to your one database. You can actually just add a model as many as you want. Right. So for now, let's just stick to the two. But you will see the benefits as soon as you start adding more models for the same child model. Now, at the moment, I only have the models that we've created before. I only got my user model right there. So I'm just going to create these three models. All right, so basically I've created our three models. We got our car model, and we got our employee model, and we got our custom model right here. And I actually created the migrations as well. So we got three migrations. We got our employee, customer, and obviously the car. Now, in a normal one-to-one relationship, basically as the child is the employee, is the parent of the car. So what we can do in the relationship, let's define that relationship quickly. Right, so that relationship would have worked. The employee is the parent. So basically, we can do a public function. All right, and that would have been, in this case, called car. Okay, and this is going to be a has1. And then we basically can return that relationship. This is 1. And then we can just obviously call in the car class. All right, so we got this as 1. All right, in the car, we will have basically a relationship of a belongs to. Now, the same thing will happen for the customer. The customer will also have, let me just put in a customer. Right, the customer will basically have the same thing. Also, it belongs to. Now, in here, under your employee, that's fine, the car. Now, under the customer, we'll basically have the same relationship of a has one, like this. Now, in this case, is the car has one, and we obviously need to import it right there. So, then that kind of relationship. Now, the problem now is, now, as I said before, now, if we add another belongs to relationship right here. It's now this time it's going to be owner. All right, and then we're obviously going to have a owner class right here. Just as an example, this can be many different other classes. Now I'm just showing an example of what can happen. Now the problem now is this is all okay. Let's say now it's starting to get a lot. Now in the database schema of our car model, because the car is basically the child of all these parents, right? So if we're going to go to resources, our database migrations under our car, right here, if we set the foreign ID, we need to create an employee ID. Let's do that quickly. Right? So basically now we will have an employee ID and a customer ID and an owner ID. Right? And obviously with the just going to add a table here for string and just the name of the car or the license or whatever, right? But in this case, now, if you need to add a fourth column of another ID, as you can see, because if the employee is taking the car, having the car, basically these other three fields will basically be null. Then only the employee ID will actually be in the database. Now, as you can see, it will kind of get messy and will get kind of big database, all right, because it will be difficult to manage. But like I said, it's possible to do it this way, all right? But what we can do now with polymorphism, we don't have to do all of this stuff. So I can actually, let me just close this. Now, how do we set up polymorphic relationship, one-to-one relationship? All right, so let's just delete all of this. So what we do now in our child model, basically, we're going to do a public function. We set up the model like this, a public function. Okay, the public function. And basically, we're going to say car. And then we basically add the able or able at the end right here. Now, basically, what we're saying is the car is... so basically, the employee is able to use the car or the customer is able to rent the car. All right. Basically, in that sense, we add the able at the end. Now, basically, then what we do is we return this morph to like this. Obviously, just want to add my morph to here. Right. So then basically, we're saying, now, if we, let's say, set up the inverse in the employee, in the parent one. Right, so we're going to do a public function. Now, this one, basically, we're going to call in that car model. All right, we're going to say, okay, return. And then we're going to say morph1. Right, then we're going to say morph1, and basically we're going to return this, basically, obviously the car class. Now here's the part that we want to let the Laravel know which kind of relationship it is and on the database, and we're just going to do the car bill. So basically the employee is able to use the car. That's kind of the terms that I think of it. Now, obviously, I need to add the morph1 in here. All right. So basically, now Laravel will know the carable, the relationship right here, is the one that I'm mentioning inside our carable right here. This one right here is what I'm mentioning inside an employee. So the employee is able to use the car model. All right, if you can think of it in that terms. The next thing is we need to add the same relationship basically in our customer. So now with this is we can add as many models to the car model as we want. So basically add another parent that can use, let me just delete the has one because I'm not going to use it. All right, to the car model. So if we have another model of owner, we can actually add the same relationship and we don't need to change anything. All right, so now we got our carable. Okay, so employee is able to use the car and the customer is able to use the car. Now the thing is, now that we define that relationship between the three, so basically the car that is the child to those two parents. Now let's go to basically set up our database schema to kind of see how do we set up this relationship in a database. Now, you guys remember that what we have done is we added basically all that foreign ID keys right here. We're not going to do that now. Now, basically what we're doing is we're going to use a table and we're going to say morphs. Okay, and then we're going to say carable. Now, basically what this morphs does, it's going to have two tables in our database, or you can type them out manually. You don't have to use the morphs. You can just do it like table. I'm just creating space for ourselves, okay, of unsigned big integer. And it's basically going to be, the first one is going to be carable ID. And the next field that it will create, and obviously unsigned, okay, next field that it will create is another table for a string. Now this table is basically going to be the carable type. Now the carable type is basically the model that we're going to link to. So inside that will basically be a reference of our model. So in our case, it will be amp models. And let's say the first one will basically, let's use the customer. All right. So it either will be the customer model that will be referenced in the type or the employee that will be referenced in the type. Okay. But you don't have to do this if you use the morphs. It's basically one that replaces these two right here. All right, so if we delete that and actually migrate our database, if we go to our cars model right here in our database table, so if we go to the cars, you will see now we have that table of carable type and carable ID. And obviously our timestamps, I've created it and updated it. And obviously the name of the car. All right, so now with just the morphs too, you can create this. All right, so now what I've done is I just added some fillable fields in our car model, obviously in our employee and in our customer model. Now the thing is, what I want to do now is I want to be able to, on the relationships, on the morph relationship, actually create a car for the employee and for the customer. So how do we do that? So as you guys can see, we're in our database right now and it's empty. So if we go and just check our customers, you will see I've folded in with some data. We got for Mohammed, we got Jared and all that kind of stuff for our customers. And we obviously folded in for our employees as well. Now I'm just going to choose a random just the first customer or the first employee and just assign a car to them and see what it does. So let's go back to VS Code and do that. Right, so basically I've opened up my terminal and I'm going to use Tinker to do this job for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to just start up Tinker, PHP artisan, Tinker. So if we do that, we can actually just open up the shell for Tinker, the command line right there. Now the thing is, what we want to do is we want to get basically the first employee. So let's do that. We assign employee and we're going to equal that employee basically to the full namespace app models and obviously the employee. Now I could have said get me find me an ID, but I'm just going to go for the first one. Okay, so get me the first one. Right, so we returned Arthur Becker. as an employee. Now, what I want to do is I want to assign Arthur, basically create a rental car for Arthur. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say employee, and then we're just going to call on the cars, and then we're going to call create. And then what we're going to create is going to create a name, and obviously I'm just going to call it BMW, just as an example. Obviously this is all hypothetical. So obviously if I put it a license plate, so we only have 2 cars, BMW and a Toyota and maybe a Mazda in there. Okay, so we're going to give the customer the Mazda. All right, so in this case we created that. So if you press enter, right, I had to restart there. Now the thing is, what we want to do is we want to basically create a car for this employee. So let's just create an employee. Now I called on the cars method, but this is a singular one-to-one, so it will be only a car. And then we're going to call the create method on it, and then obviously we're going to add the name, and we had to do a BMW, if I remember correctly. Right, so like this. So if you press enter, we need to create a car now for that employee. I missed spell that like this. Okay. All right, so now we created a car for that employee. Now, as you can see, under our car model now, we've got a name of BMW. Let's go to a database. It will be easier to see there. So basically now in our database, if we go to, let's go to our Eloquent right there and go to our cars. Now, as you can see, what happens now, the name of BMW is assigned to a carable ID of 1, and it's assigned to the employee's type right there. Now, let's assign another one to the customer, but this time I only got 3. Now, this time I'm going to assign the Toyota basically to our customer. So let's do that. So back in VS Code, I'm going to do customer. And I'm just, in this one time, I'm also going to get the first one, just the first one. So models, and we're going to get the first customer. Okay, and just give us the first one. Now, who is the first customer? All right, Sierra is basically our first customer, and the customer, we're just going to assign a car to that customer, and we're basically calling on their relationship, their morph-to-many relationship on it, and we're just going to call the create method on it, and inside that, we're just going to assign the Toyota basically to our customer. Toyota. Yes, spelled it right. Okay. So we assigned the Toyota to that customer. All right. So if we go to our database, now if I refresh, you will basically see now we got our Toyota assigned to our model right there. Now, the thing about me is I don't like our whole model path to be displayed in our car type right there. I either wanted to show employee or customer. So how do we do that? Let's go to VS Code. I'm just going to minimize my terminal. So what we do is under app, under providers, you get our app service provider right here. So under the boot method, we can actually specify the path that we want to set for our mapping of our morphs relationships. So how do we do that? All right, so basically what I've done now is I put the relation in there, and we obviously have to make sure we import it at the top. All right, so as you can see right there, our relation is imported at the top. Otherwise, you will run into a bit of an error. Now, the thing is, that field in the database where we actually map to the full path to our model, we actually just want it to be employee, and the other one we just want to be customer. Right, so I'm just going to refresh the database and reseed it, and then we're just going to create those two again. So just to show you how it will look like now. Okay, so let's do that. So basically, I'm just going to exit here, and then I'm just going to migrate fresh. So basically with the migrate fresh, it will kind of remove all the tables and all the data, and the dash seed, it will just basically refill the database with a seeder. Okay, now that's all done, let's start up Tinker again. PHP Artisan Tinker. So we've got Tinker startup, and we're basically going to get our first employee again. Okay, that's going to equal to the app, models, and obviously our employee. Now we just want to get the first one. All right, so we've got our Alice is our first one. So on Alice, we just want to basically assign the BMW again, or let's give Alice basically the Mazda. Let's give her the Mazda. So the name, we're going to assign the Mazda to right. So now we assigned it. Now, as you can see, the carable type changed to the employee. All right. So let's do a next one for the customer. So customer, please get us the first one as well. So if we get our first customer, and let's drum roll and see who our customer is. It's Kim. All right, so let's give Kim our BMW. So we're going to assign the customer.car, and we're just going to create, and we're going to give Kim basically our BMW. It's a rental, obviously, but this is purely hypothetical, so this is just to see how the relationship and everything works. Okay, just like that. All right, so as you can see in our carable tab, it's now customer. So if we go to our database, this is the old data. So if we refresh it, it's supposed to give us the new ones. As you can see, it gives us the carable type of employee and of the customer. All right, and Laravel will obviously handle the whole kind of thing. So basically, employee ID of 1 will be assigned to that, and a customer ID of 1 will be assigned to that. All right, so let's go back to VS Code. That is basically polymorphic one-to-one relationships in a nutshell. Now, the thing is, if you add now, it's quite easy if you want to add another model. So if we want to add the owner model, the only thing that we will need to change, we don't need to go to our database migrations right here and add under the car model right here. We don't need to add the owner ID or anything. We don't have to touch this at all now. Now, the next thing, the only thing that we're going to do now is we just need to set up the relationship in that model. So in our case, I'm just going to do it in our, okay, we don't have time, but we could have just sent it up here, another public function for the car and in our user model, and basically then you're all good to go. And obviously in your service provider, you just want to assign that mapping as well. Yeah, that's all you have to do. All right. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a like. If you didn't like it, please give it a dislike. And constructive feedback is always appreciated, even if it's negative. And always appreciated. Because the thing is, that's the only way we can learn. And yes, thank you guys for watching, and consider subscribing to the channel. It will just help us out, and the likes will just help us out to let more people find the videos if you find it useful anyways. All right, thank you guys, and see you in the next one. Goodbye.